This morning, I want to talk about motivation. And as we get started with the lesson, the word motivation, we kind of probably understand what it means. Our motives prompt us to action. It's the thing that makes us get up in the morning. What is our purpose? And this is kind of a recurring theme, throughout many lessons that we share together from the Word. What is it that causes us to get up in the morning? What motivates us to do the things that we do? It's probably a foregone conclusion that we get up in the morning and go to work because, we need to eat. we need to put food on the table. But what is it then that continues to motivate us to do everything in our lives? This morning you woke up, you drank coffee perhaps, and maybe had some breakfast, and then you were motivated to get into your vehicles and come here. Well, what is it that motivated you? Did someone drag you out of bed by your toes and force you to get dressed and get ready and get in the car in 5 minutes? Is that how it went this morning? Or were you excited and happy and motivated to come because of a love for the Lord? A love for the Lord, an understanding love that understands His command for His people to come together on the first day of the week. And again, not doing that because it's commanded out of some compulsion, but coming together because of that love of the Lord. Our motives prompt us to most anything. You just think of something that you do in your life, and there's a motivation there. The motivation to go to the coffee pot in the morning is to get coffee, to have that wake up call that comes from the coffee, and those things, however superficial, we have our motivations in life. Hopefully, we can agree that it's a good thing to be motivated by the Word and motivated by the love of the Lord. When we think of motivation, perhaps children might come to mind. And if you look to Ephesians 6 at verse 1, very simply says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." So what's the motivation there? Why should a child obey his or her parents in the Lord? Why is it that the Lord desires that children listen to their parents? Because it is right. Because it is right. And that's something that, it's a simplistic statement, but because it is right. And so when you ask yourself, why you do so many things, well, is it right? And by what measurement are you coming to that conclusion that something is right? I've mentioned before that in college I was tasked with writing. This was in a philosophy class that I was forced to take against my own will. I was asked to write a paper on the nature of good and evil, but don't use the scriptures as an example. And I don't know how to do that. And I wrote the paper with using scriptures, and I got through the class. I ended up getting a B+, I think, on that paper. But I think that was the purpose behind what the teacher wanted us to do, is to think, to be able to defend our own, defend our own thoughts, defend the things that we hold most dear. And so today, are you motivated to be here and to be a Christian because of your love of the Lord, to do what is right, because you understand that the Lord is right? I hope so. And if not, I hope that something might be said. It is our prayer that something might be said that you would gain that motivation, that you don't go through life just showing up to church because Grandma said so, because your dad dragged you out of bed in the morning. I didn't mean to point at you, Connor. Because someone dragged you out of bed and forced you to come together with the saints. That's not the purpose. The Lord desires that we love Him. Just like we desire that our children love us and understand that we have their best interests at hand. That they are motivated to listen to us because we're telling them good things, because we're teaching them good things, and we can be trusted. Not because if they don't, there's going to be some horrible punishment, that they're going to have to do some manual labor or take a beating because they didn't do what we said. Now there's a place for punishment. There's a place for the rod, of course, in correction. But the end goal of such a thing is that the proper motivation be instilled in that young person. And while of course the Lord desires that we have that right motivation, sometimes the word that we read in the scriptures, sometimes it cuts to the heart. Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes we have to face that correction in our hearts. And hopefully we come out of that with a motivation to do better. Sometimes people have bad motives. Sometimes people just have set out to do ill will against others from the very beginning. And in John 13 verse 2, we see an example of one who had some bad motives lurking in his heart. John 13 verse 2 says, "And supper being ended, the devil having already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him." It was already in his heart. And you see there that it says that the devil having already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot. Well, how did that happen? Sometimes we might like to think, well, the devil put it in there and he didn't have a choice. Judas didn't have a choice because he was going to have to betray the Lord, and it was just the way that it is. And he was some robot that went ahead and did what he did without having thought. But think about how does Satan put things into our hearts each and every day? How is it that when we devise in our own minds, and I imagine each one of us can identify with this, that at some point in our lives we've devised in our own minds some way to do something bad, to go against what we know is right. What was that motivation? What was it that caused us, and I don't even want to say that, what was it that we allowed to put us into that situation? It was probably something like greed. It was some kind of self-will, some kind of selfishness that took hold of us that caused us to do those things. And when we look back to this lesson is not about Judas, so I'll leave it to you to go back and study more about Judas if you haven't already, and understand that he had been taking money from the purse, that he had greed that was festering inside of him, and add to that he just seemed to not have a true grasp of what was really going on, that he could sell Jesus away to the Romans, that he could just go ahead and take for himself those pieces of silver. He learned a lesson in the end, and sadly, he came to a bitter end. But his motives in this instance were bad, and they led to bad things. It's something that a very simple statement. Bad motives lead to bad things. Selfishness and jealousy and envy, those things all lead to a bad place. Just try to think within your own mind, where is it that we can be selfish and come out in a good place? Where is it that we can be jealous and envious of our neighbor and our friend and come out in a good place, one that is honorable. In Romans 2, starting at verse 8, we read, "But to those who are self-seeking and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, indignation and wrath, tribulation and anguish on every soul of man who does evil, of the Jew first and also of the Greek. But glory, honor, and peace to everyone who works what is good, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For there is no partiality with God." We don't want to be those that are self-seeking, those that do not obey the truth. In fact, that's the whole main reason why when we look around us today, there's so much confusion in the religious world. You go down the street and up the street and into town here behind us. If you look around, there are so many buildings that claim Christ on their sign. There are so many groups of people meeting today that claim Christ, yet they do things that can't be found in the Scriptures. And why is that? It's because of some desire within themselves, a self-seeking desire for something that they want to add and add to Christ. This morning on the way here, I was listening to, as I was scanning through the stations on the radio and trying to find something to listen to, one of the stations I came to actually had some kind of a religious song that had started, but the song had said, basically, the words were, "I asked Jesus into my heart, and he saved me." Now, where do we find that in the Scriptures? And when you really stop and think about it, why would someone go to that end and say that you can just ask Jesus into your heart and everything's going to be okay? And I think the rest of some of the other lyrics went on that no matter what I do, Jesus saved me. Well, why would someone come to that conclusion? That no matter what they do, as long as they love Jesus, as long as they, and there's a whole other lesson in that, what does it really mean to love Jesus? But why would they come to the conclusion that they could just ask Jesus into their hearts? Because of some selfishness when you really boil down to it. It's because, in effect, they want to make God something that is of their own construction. They want to make His will for man something that they thought up. They haven't taken the time to look into the Word, to find out what the Lord has asked, to find out that Christ has all authority, to find out that it's them that needs to be obedient and not God. When we make up things in our minds and in our hearts that, this is what I'd really like it to be like, this is what I really wish Jesus would allow me to do to be saved, we're putting ourselves in the place of God. And at their root, there are bad motives there. You might feel like they're good motives, but in the end, they're bad motives. Sometimes bad motives can look like indifference, idleness, carelessness, and negligence. We sit around and wait for others to do the work. We sit around and we don't allow ourselves to get involved, to seek the Lord, to look into the Word for ourselves. We're just indifferent about it. We take our Bible and we put it on the shelf, and there it gathers dust, and every so often we dust it off. But we're indifferent about it. We don't really care. Yeah, okay. Well, it's Sunday. I'll go to church or I won't. Maybe there's something else going on. That carelessness, when you really boil it down, it leads to bad motives. Bad motives lead, again, to bad results. You can't do something wrong and expect the right outcome and expect a good outcome. It's just not possible. In anything that we do, if we are working on our vehicle, we can't do something wrong and come out with a car that works properly. We have to make sure that we are doing things according to the will of the Lord. Now, on the other hand, good motives, they lead to good things. If we have good motivation in our heart, if we are desiring to seek after the Lord, yes, sometimes we're going to be wrong. Every single one of us will be wrong from time to time. But if we have good motives, if we desire the best, that's going to cause us to be diligent. It's going to cause us to seek out the truth and to be careful about those things if we have good motives. We need to remember the why of Ephesians 6:1, because it is right. That's why the Lord desires that we do the things that he asks, because it is right. Just the same as we desire our children to do what we ask. Hopefully, because it's right. And going back to Ephesians 6:1, it says for children to obey their parents in the Lord. If parents, sadly, sometimes ask their children to do things that are inherently wrong, that are clearly wrong, then some other way needs to be found. But when your parents are seeking for your best interest, when you can look into the Word of God and understand that this is a good thing, when the Lord desires good things for us, we need to follow those things because they are good, because they come from the standard of good that cannot be usurped by any other. Let's read in Matthew 22, starting at verse 37. Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." If you do these things, if this is the foundation of your motives, of the thing that moves you, because you love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your mind, forget that it's a commandment. Good things are going to come from that. You're going to look into the Word and understand it and desire to know more. You're going to share that truth with everyone that you meet because you love him. And what does it really mean? Again, there's a whole other lesson in this idea of what does it really mean to love the Lord? What does it mean to love the Lord? Does it mean that you say, "Yes, I love you, Jesus," and you sway your hands in the air and you reach up to the heavens to try to reach God? Does it mean that you have Bibles on every table in your house? Or does it mean something more like, well, I do what he says. I read and study the Scriptures, and I pattern my life after those things that I read about in the Scriptures. We're told in the Scriptures, Christ even says, "If you love me, keep my commandments. If you love me, do my will." Good motives lead to good things. They lead to higher standards and happy living and success. This is even true in superficial ways, just speaking from an earthly standpoint. If you love your children and your wife and your family, if you want good things for them, that leads to higher standards for them. It leads to a happier home when love is there. It leads to success. Any psychologist will tell you that a family that is made up of a husband and a wife and children that is together and cares for one another is going to yield children that are more well-balanced and rounded and are able to deal with the difficulties of life. Let alone when we go further and add Christ into the mix. If we have a family that is made up of a husband and a wife and children that are seeking to pattern their lives after the way of Christ, then we have something really good. We have something that cannot be touched by this world if we just continue on the course. Good motives lead to good things. They lead to success. If we have good motives, if we are motivated by our love for the Lord, by our knowledge of the truth and understanding what the will of the Lord is, good things will come of our lives. Good things will come in eternity. When we take good motives and we add to it knowledge, we add to that obedience because it's an important part of what the Lord desires, then we have salvation. If we study to show ourselves approved, if we find out what the truth is and then we do it, that we're not hearers only but doers of the word, then we'll find ourselves in that end with salvation. Because it's a foregone conclusion. If you have good motives, if you're motivated by the love of the Lord, by a desire to know him, you can't help but come to the end and understanding that you need to do the things that the Lord has commanded. Paul's life followed this pattern. We can see it in this example of the life that Paul lived. Let's go to Galatians 1, starting at verse 14. And I advanced in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries in my own nation, being more exceedingly zealous for the traditions of my fathers. But when it pleased God, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me through his grace to reveal his Son in me, that I might preach him among the Gentiles, I did not immediately confer with flesh and blood. Paul had a great zeal for the Lord, even when he was persecuting those that were of the Lord. Paul came to the understanding of truth, and he had good motives behind him. He wasn't out for the blood and the gore and the satisfaction of the conquering of individuals. He was there and doing the things that he did because he desired to be a godly person. And as we'll read in just a moment, it was well with his conscience. He acted in all good conscience throughout his life. When he came to the realization and the understanding that he needed to be preaching Christ, he did just that. It ended up in that direction with him. If we go to Acts 23 at verse 1, it says, Then Paul, looking earnestly at the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. You think about all the things that he did. We can go back, and again, there's another couple lessons in that. But look for yourselves at the things that Paul did leading up to this time. And they were atrocious. But in the end, we understand that he came to the knowledge of truth, and he acted upon that. Now, we are told, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11 and verse 1, imitate me just as I also imitate Christ. He went from being one who persecuted those who claimed him to one who imitated him. And why did he do that? Because his motives were good. He desired good things all the way through. He was misguided, but he continued and he learned from the situations that he came about in life, and he changed his focus. But his motives remained to be one who lives with a good conscience before God. So today, as you're sitting here, what is your motivation? Can you say that your motivation is to live like the Lord has desired? Can you say that your motivation is good, or is it bad? Are you here today because someone forced you to? Are you here today because you just think it's I might as well? Are you here for some indifferent reason? Hopefully you're here out of a good motivation. One that will lead each and every one of us to that, as Anderson prayed a few moments ago, that we might all be in heaven. The Lord desires that all come to the knowledge of truth. That doesn't exclude anybody. That means everyone. So today, as we bring this lesson to a close, are you motivated to hear the truth and follow Christ? Are you motivated to do, as we see in the example of Paul, to hear and to understand and then change your actions for the rest of your days? In John 10 at verse 27, beginning, it says, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them. They follow me, and I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. Neither shall anyone snatch them out of my hand." You know, if we have good motivation, and if we seek after the Lord, and we continue to build each other up with the Word, and build ourselves up with the Word, nobody can snatch us out of the Lord's hand. If we are truly his sheep, we follow him. We hear his voice. Those are some things to think about as we go through this next week. You know, in the scriptures, we see that hearing is important. Romans 10:17 tells us that if we hear the word, that we gain faith. That faith then leads us to a belief that Christ is. Are you sitting here today, and have you heard the word? Do you believe that Christ is? Are you willing to repent and turn away from sins that separate you from the Lord? Like Paul, he turned away and made his life walk in a completely different direction. At the end, he says, "I fought the good fight. I've finished the race." Are you willing to fight that good fight? Are you willing to turn from the things that are a separation between you and the Lord? Are you willing to confess Christ before men? Are you willing to confess Christ before men unashamedly? Are you willing to submit to the obedient action of baptism? Are you willing to be baptized for the remission of sins? Not for any other reason. It's not a washing of the filth of the flesh. It's not an outward sign of an inward experience. That's just a lie of Satan. In every instance that you can read about in Acts 2, when so many thousands were saved on the day of Pentecost, to Acts 8, when the Ethiopian eunuch went down into the waters of baptism confessing Christ. It was for the remission of sins. And in each case, they came up out of the water rejoicing and walking in that new direction. Are you ready to do that today? Are you outside of Christ today? The waters of baptism are ready just behind me. We can make that happen if you so desire. If you're sitting here today and you found that life has become difficult and well, the road's been tough, and you're struggling with your faith, well, look around us. We have a family here, one with another, united in this desire to do things in a godly way. And if you desire the prayers of the saints here, we would be glad to do that with you and for you, that we might strengthen one another, and again, as it was prayed just a few moments ago, that we all might make it to heaven. That's the ultimate goal in Christ's life on this earth. It's the ultimate goal in those that follow him. Again, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. Are you willing and ready to do that? Please come forward as we stand and sing.